So I'm going to mention a couple of things first. Oh, I'll start by saying, hi, I'm Becka Oliver. I'm the Executive Director at the Writers League of Texas. I am also a former literary agent, and I worked in publishing for a number of years. So I have the knowledge of having read a lot of query letters, received a lot of query letters from writers unsolicited, and then also having figured out how to talk about books in a compelling way so that I could query editors and get them excited about it. So I love talking about query letters. I love helping writers sort of demystify the whole process of publishing. So I'm glad that you're here tonight, and I hope to answer your questions. So I wanted to mention, though, before we get started, that we do have some online classes coming up, and the next one is this Saturday. A really wonderful instructor, Rachel Starnes, who's done a number of classes for us, is going to do a special class on a topic that we've been wanting to do for a while, and that is writing about trauma. So it'll happen on Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's one of our 3-hour classes online, and you can register until tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And then I also want to remind you that if you're a member of the Writers League, you can do open office hours, which is an opportunity to talk with a staff member for 30 minutes. Every month is typically when we do it, but for right now, we're doing it every Wednesday. So once a week between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. Central Time, we're setting up appointments. Many of them are going to be with me, and I'll give you a call and answer your questions. You can ask me additional questions about query letters. Thanks, Rosemary. You can ask me additional questions about query letters, anything you want to talk about that has to do with your writing. And it's just I love doing it because it's a great way to connect with our writers and our members, but it's also an opportunity for you to ask some questions and get some advice. I hope you'll check out our podcast. We've got a lot of great episodes up, over 40, I believe, at this point, and they are pretty terrific. So they're available wherever you can find podcasts. And then we've really started adding to our YouTube channel a great bit. We've had a YouTube channel for many years, but I will be honest and say that we haven't added anything to it in quite some time. So we're polishing it up. We have a lot of the videos, the webinars that we've been doing are there, but you'll also see if you go to it, and I hope you will, that we have not only the live webinars we've been doing, but we are starting to do original craft presentations. So tomorrow evening at 6:30, Michael Knoll recorded a craft presentation for us on finding the voice in your mystery novel, but he's going to do a live chat when we release the video tomorrow evening at 6:30, and he'll be on the chat at YouTube to answer any questions that you have as the video plays. We also have some of our classes that we've done in the past, online classes that we're making available for free on YouTube for anyone who wants to take a look at them. And then we have some of our podcasts are going to be uploaded there too. So I hope you guys will check it out. Your test worked, but you're sending only to all panelists. So you want to send to all panelists and attendees. Okay, and then the last thing I'll mention is that next Thursday, I'm really excited. Our next Ask Us Anything will be with Stacy Swan, and it's going to be on editing and revising. So for those of you who are tackling revisions, for those of you who are curious about the best way to start revising, anything that you could possibly want to know about editing and revising, Stacy is an accomplished writer herself, but she's actually in the middle of revising her novel for probably the 4th or 5th time because it's being published by Doubleday next year. So she's been working with her editor really closely and is, I think, going to bring a lot of great information to this conversation. So we'll be doing that live next Thursday at 8 p.m. All right, so now we are here to talk about query letters. I told you a little bit about myself already, and I would say that, you know, everything I say is going to be very specific to my opinion on this subject. I'm sure that many of you could tell me that you've heard people say something slightly different or have a different definition of what a synopsis is or how long a query letter should be. But I feel pretty confident that at least the information I will give you should set you off on a good path in terms of getting your query letter together, figuring out what needs to be in it, and maybe what shouldn't be in it. And then also just feeling confident when you send it out to agents. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to jump off with a lot of the questions that you already asked through the Google form that many of you filled out. And then I'm also going to do my best to answer some of the questions that pop up in the chat. So with that in mind, again, make sure you're sending to all panelists and attendees so that we all see your questions or comments. Consider holding questions until the end because I may answer them as we go. I did have a lot of really great and specific questions that I think are going to be helpful for all of you. But if you have a question about something that I'm currently talking about, please go ahead and share it. It's only me here, so I am going to try to keep an eye on the chat box, but I'm also going to be trying to keep the presentation going. So if I don't get to your question, ask it again at the end, okay? Okay, so we had a lot of questions come in and I've sort of grouped them into categories. And the first category I would say overwhelmingly were a lot of questions about whether or not you should even be querying right now. So here's what you guys asked. Is this a good time to query? Are agents encouraging submissions right now? How are agents and publishers handling queries and submissions during this quarantine? And is it acceptable to send queries? This is a great question. So is it acceptable to send queries? And then if not, how long do you wait until you actually do? Of course, great question. And then for submissions in the next couple of months, do you think query letters should contain a general acknowledgement of current events? For example, once we get through this difficult time, my novel can provide a great escape, a light read, or just write the query business as usual. So as I was reading these questions, I realized I should go to some of the agents that I know and ask them what they're doing right now, because I have been talking to some folks and I had a sense of what was happening, but I thought I would let them answer for you directly. So that's what I did. So here are some of the responses that I got from agents. I am accepting queries and I'm hard at work from home. Yes, yes, especially if your project has a positive, inspirational, or ultimately uplifting, life-affirming message. And then somebody said, yes, accepting and reading queries and signing new authors still. Even if publishers stopped buying for a moment, they'll be buying in the future, and I need to keep giving them things to buy. So now is a fine time. My advice to writers is to be patient and understanding. We're all adapting to a new reality. Some people are dealing with personal losses or losses of income, and a little empathy goes a long way. Only two people, only one person said that he wasn't taking anything on right now. I'm not taking anything on. I think a few agents are. It'll be interesting to hear what you learn. I probably will be desperate for stuff in a couple weeks, but right now I don't have the bandwidth. And keep in mind that a lot of agents are like everybody else, right? They're not only working from home, but they're probably starting, if they have kids, if they have a family, they're dealing with homeschooling and that sort of thing. Another person said, I'm receiving and reading submissions by email only. I think it's an okay time to submit, but writers should just be sensitive to the fact that everyone is preoccupied and juggling more than usual. So it's an okay time to submit, but maybe not as good a time to follow up or to follow up quickly, if that makes any sense. Which it does, right? You could submit right now, but you're probably not going to pressure anyone and ask them, have you read it? Have you read it? Have you read it? Give them a little bit of time to sort of deal with what they're dealing with. And then someone else said, I'm reading queries always, but to be honest, I'm looking at very little. More so than before because publishers are in dire straits, and so I don't anticipate much buying happening for a while. Thus, current projects are backlogged and I need to service those before taking on much that's new. I foresee a better time being in the latter part of the summer. The only other advice I'd give is to keep supporting other writers right now. There are a lot of debut authors publishing into this moment and they're suffering. So to champion their works, to write reviews, and to generally be a good literary citizen, karma that I believe will come back one day. I love that advice. Okay, so here we go. Yes. I and all of my fellow colleagues are absolutely accepting queries. It is a fine time to reach out. Perhaps the only caveat is that some of us are moving a bit more slowly, this whole homeschooling business. I'm looking for expert-driven narrative nonfiction, science, history, women's issues, biographies, social justice, etc., plus plot-driven literary and upmarket fiction. And since she was so specific about it, I decided to put her name here. So that's Jessica Papan, and she's at Distal, Goderich, and Barrett. Someone else said, yes, I'm accepting unsolicited queries, but I will automatically delete queries that aren't addressed to me directly and those that don't follow submission guidelines. Also, I delete queries which include the following. I've written 4 books, but there's no mention of the titles, publishers, or publication dates. Ditto for short story collection queries that don't include the publication credits for the stories in the collection, which are kind of basic things that many agents would tell you, that you want to include those details. 2 wonderful resources, the Agent Database of Poets and Writers and the AAR, Association of Authors Representatives. And I think I have maybe one more for you. This one I think is really very thoughtful, and I appreciated her taking the time to write this. I think there's no universal answer to this, so people should consider following the cues of those agents on social media if they're on it. I see some agents talking about being swamped because they have young kids, for example, and others saying they're really hungry for submissions because they have more reading time than usual. I'm not closed to queries because we're never closed, but I'm busier than usual, so probably will be slower on new queries than I'd usually be this time of year. Everyone's situation is a little different, so doing your due diligence, being strategic, and being patient and thoughtful are the best tools a writer has, as is always the case. If now is the time a writer has the time to query, I don't think they have to hold off. There is never a time to query that is perfect for all agents, but they might want to try smaller rounds of queries. If your book is light and escapist, it might be the thing an agent is craving right now. I think probably the most important advice I have is not to try to use the pandemic as a hook. I don't know that any agents are appreciating that. It usually comes off as crass, and a lot of writers are trying it. If your book just happens to be dystopian, you might want to consider waiting till it feels less topical. All right. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it gives you a sense of the sort of temperature in the room right now for publishing, that, you know, and a lot of the agents that I've talked to who are personal friends have said that they recognize that publishers and editors have certainly had an adjustment period. Working from home is not easy. Figuring out how an office where usually, you know, publishing is a very collaborative environment. So when you go from working with people who you can step into their office and answer questions easily to having to deal with it all remotely, it's very hard. So they're figuring out their jobs, they're figuring out what their personal life, how their personal life is going to intersect with those jobs being at home. But the agents themselves, I think, recognize that actually it's a pretty remarkable time, and a lot of people are turning to books and turning to written content. And so it's exciting for them to know that, you know, once we get a little bit further into this and people have figured out what their normal is, that they are going to be able to get authors into publishing houses and make some really great deals. So, you know, I think that there's optimism there, even though everybody is very concerned about what's happening in the world, but not so concerned about whether or not books are going to continue to sell. So, all right. So the next category I thought we would cover is just the basic question, what is a query letter? So when you signed on, I asked you guys to let me know if you've written a query letter, what your experience has been. And it seems like a lot of you have, and some of you have not. So just to back it up a little bit, a query letter is really the accepted and expected way that you introduce yourself to an agent when you're ready to start looking for representation. So if you're wanting a literary agent to represent you, you're going to need to approach them, and the best way to approach them is to have a query letter and to follow their submission guidelines. So if you're not familiar with submission guidelines, pretty much every agency is going to outline the way that they want you to contact them. They'll tell you it may be a form on their website, which is not, I know, the preferred way to do it, or it may be a specific submission email address, and they're going to tell you if they want you to attach any materials to that, if they want you to put any materials in the body of the email, if they want a synopsis, if they want a word count, all of those sorts of things, right? The query letter is going to be one of the things that they're going to want. And it's the introduction to you and the introduction to your work. So I think a query letter, it should be 1 page, no longer. I think most agents would agree with that. You know, there's certainly a lot that you could say, but the point is for you to just get their attention, make it sound compelling, and get them to want to read something. So the more you write, the more you give them. You know, you want to give them enough that it's enticing, but you don't want to give them so much that you finally give them something that allows them to say no, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. So we'll get into your specific questions about query letters and see if you have any more. Jane Friedman has a query letter writing article on her website. She plainly states that the fiction manuscript work must be complete, not half of a book or awesome first 25 pages and synopsis before sending query letters. Please comment. Yes, this would be true. So the expectation is if you're writing fiction, if you're writing a novel, you need to have the complete manuscript. You need to have a manuscript that has been revised by you. Come to our Ask Us Anything next week if you want to talk about that, but that's ready to go, that you yourself feel really confident in, that you've probably shared with other people, whoever those people might be, that you can get some good feedback from. It's very frustrating as an agent if you get a query letter that sounds great, if you're excited, if you read 20 pages and you like what you've read, and then you ask for the complete manuscript and they say, oh, it's not finished yet. I'll probably be done in about 6 months. Wait till those 6 months are up and then query the agent. So yes, absolutely. With fiction, you want to have it complete. With nonfiction, the expectation is usually that you're going to submit with a proposal. You don't have to have a complete manuscript. And you can find a ton of stuff online about nonfiction proposals. And if you want me to help you with that, if you want me to point you to some, I can do that. Okay. I have written query letters with some success, but I struggle with it. I know it should be no more than 1 page, but sometimes it seems much too limiting. Any suggestions on what to write would be great. So the way that and some of you have probably heard this before, so I apologize, but the way that I break down query letters is with something that I call the 4 C's. So the first C of a query letter, yes, Jessica, the first C of a query letter is connection. It's the way that you show that agent very early on that you are not wasting their time, that you've taken the time to do your research and you know that they represent the sort of book that you're writing. So the connection can be, you know, if you've met someone at a conference, obviously the connection is I met you at a conference, but the connection could be I read an interview where you said you're looking for great memoirs, or I saw that you publish or that you represent X writer and I'm writing something in that same space. It's just a place where you make it clear that you are not just, you know, throwing the spaghetti against the wall. You actually have sought them out for a specific reason. The second C is context, and that is, I believe early in the letter, you want to let them know what it is that you're pitching. So if you're writing a memoir, you want to early on make it clear that your book is a memoir. If your book is science fiction and fantasy, if it's a particular genre, I think it's really great early on to let them know that, because that in some ways anchors them in the letter and they know, they take that with them as they look at the rest of the letter. So as they start to read more about the story, they have an idea about where that story fits on the shelf, if that makes sense. And that's the best way to think about context, is where in the bookstore would your book sit? Make sure the agent understands that. And that's also where you might offer comparison titles. So then the third C is compel. And compel is that one paragraph, that meaty paragraph, where you give them the most compelling bits of what you have in this book that's going to make them, that will make them want to read something. So meaning, you know, what is it a particularly compelling setting? Is there something, is it a historical novel and the time period is particularly interesting? Usually you're going to talk about at least your main character in this paragraph, and you're going to give us some sense of what their story is, what their journey is going to be, where they're starting and where they're going to end, so that we get excited about taking that journey with them. It's compelling. So it's not a synopsis. It's not the entire story, you know, just boiled down to one paragraph. It's not giving everything away, but just giving enough that they want to read more. The best way to think about compel would be to look at book jackets. Go to the bookstore, not right now, go online, go to your bookshelves and look at jacket copy, because that's what that copy is, right? Like the jacket copy in a bookstore is what's supposed to entice a reader to go to the counter and pay $25. So if you can find a book that's in the same space as yours, that's in the same genre or category, I would say find a few books, look at the way they're described in that jacket copy, and work on creating a paragraph for your book that is similar to that. And then the last C is credentials. So who are you? Why are you writing this book? If it's fiction, the relevant credentials would be if you've been published before, if you have an MFA, if you have short fiction that's been published in some literary journals, if your career is tied directly to the subject matter of your book. So if you're an ER doctor and you're writing a medical thriller, that's interesting because it tells me that what you're writing is going to be authentic. That's what you need for credentials for fiction. If you have none of those things, don't force it. Just, this is my novel, the manuscript's available. For nonfiction, credentials are extremely important because often with nonfiction, the two biggest questions are, why does this topic need to be written about? And why are you the person who needs to write it? So your credentials and what you bring to that nonfiction work are important. I hope that helped. Okay, how do you do it? How to phrase it? What should be included about your book? What I have found says not to send even 1 or 2 pages of the actual book, only a general idea of the storyline. Yeah, so this one is sort of a different way of phrasing, I think, the previous question. So we've kind of covered it. But if there are follow-up questions on any of that, feel free to throw them in the chat box. Okay, so topic 3 is what to say and what not to say in a query letter. We had a few questions that I thought would sort of fit well here. So should you use a pen name or mention you're using a pen name when you're querying, especially a memoir? And I would say that the pen name conversation is usually something you're going to have with an agent, meaning I think at this stage, you are reaching out to someone in a sort of business relationship capacity, right? And so you're going to use your actual name. You're going to be very honest with them in terms of who you are, and that this is a book you're writing. And then when you're in a conversation with an agent and they're getting ready to offer you representation, if you feel like you need to be using a pen name for whatever reason, that's when you have that conversation. But I don't think you sign a query letter under a different name. And I also think you don't even bring up the idea of a pen name in that query letter because it's kind of the next conversation. It's not the querying conversation. If you're writing a memoir and you're writing under a pen name, I think that you're going to find that to be a challenge because publishers expect that when you're writing memoir, they're going to be able to promote. And when they're going to promote, they're going to use you because it's your story. So if you're writing under a different name that's not your name, that's going to be a challenge. It doesn't mean that it's not possible, but I think you have to really have a clear and strong argument for why you feel that you need to use a pen name. And again, I would say that's all conversation to be had between you and an agent when they're representing you. I want to look at this question in the chat box. Do you need to actually state in the query your manuscript is complete, or is that implied and assumed? Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it is assumed if it's fiction that your manuscript is complete. But a lot of people do that, I think, just as sort of the easy ending to a letter, the manuscript is complete and available upon request is the sort of standard line. But it's expected that your manuscript is complete. I don't think any agent who read a query letter that didn't say specifically my manuscript is complete would assume it wasn't complete because it really is assumed that it is. Okay. I am a ghostwriter. My client and I are wondering what the role of a ghostwriter should be in the querying stage. Do ghostwriting relationships scare agents away? So this is the kind of question that I would typically need a little more information for. When I think of ghostwriter, I think of somebody who truly is not going to take any credit on the book whatsoever. Usually ghostwriters are associated with celebrity books, memoirs or otherwise. But then there are collaborators, there are co-writers, there are people who help somebody who maybe is a professional and is really great at what they do in their own field, but they're not a writer, or they're not interested in being a writer. And so they have somebody who works with them. And that's expected in a lot of nonfiction and accepted in a lot of nonfiction. So depending on what your role is, really, I don't know if ghostwriter is the right word, that makes a difference. But if you're a ghostwriter for someone who's writing fiction, that's a little disconcerting because the expectation is that the author themselves has written this book, unless you're going to come forward and be a co-author, and there's two of you. So fiction's a little different. I think a ghostwriter in fiction would be something that would concern an agent for sure. But in terms of nonfiction, collaborator, co-writer, totally understood and expected. Okay. The client is a psychologist who doesn't have time to write and tells me the book over the phone while driving. Yeah, so that's a collaborator. So this book is going to be whatever proposal is written. I mean, really, it sounds like this book is likely to be a proposal, a nonfiction proposal that an agent would then shop to publishers, and you would be the writer attached to the proposal. The thing that you have to know is that sometimes publishers are going to expect that they're going to have a say in whether you're actually going to be the writer of the book. And so just making the argument for yourself as a writer within that proposal is always a good idea, whether it's your own credentials or your experience in writing other books or your close connection with the author. So just keep that in mind. And I think it's actually great to be attached at the early stage if the author really wants, we'll call her the author. If the psychologist really wants you to be a part of it, the earlier you're attached, the better. Okay. But asking about nonfiction, Heidi, so I'm assuming for nonfiction, maybe what you were asking there is, was the ghostwriting for nonfiction? I'm going to assume I answered your question. What does as told to generally infer? Yeah, it kind of infers that whoever's doing the telling hasn't written this book. So, almost like what Heidi was saying about her client who's literally telling her the book over the phone while she's driving, that's an as told to versus actually collaborating. Okay. When you collaborate directly, sometimes the writer is contributing, the author is also contributing to the writing process. All right. It is said that a query letter must seduce the agent. My preference would be to provide more substance. What is the ratio of seduction to substance? I mean, I kept this one in here because I just enjoy this question, but I would say that the substance should be seductive. So, the idea is that you're going to share the sort of basic business related information that an agent needs to know, meaning they need to know your background if it's relevant. They need to know if you have, any specific credentials that are relevant. They need to have an idea of what this book is, what the category is, but then really the seduction is probably, that might be the substance, and the seduction is probably that compel paragraph where you're really, where you're really getting in there and talking about, getting them interested in the book. That's the seduction. So think of the compel for that, and the substance is all the other stuff that you just need to include because you're expected to include it. Not hard at all, guys, right? So easy. Okay. For new unpublished writers with long careers in other fields, what's the best way to present ourselves in a query letter? Yeah, this is tough because especially if you're somebody who has written academically, right? Has written for your field, but in really academic journals or in ways that are not sort of considered the type of writing that you expect from especially a novelist. You want to include that because you're so proud and you have amazing credentials, but actually sometimes that can be a distraction for an agent. That's what I say often is what you want to include in the query letter are the things that will not distract them. And the more distractions you add to the query letter, the easier it is for them to decide that it's not for them. So sometimes the words, I have been a neuroscientist for 25 years, and I have published academic pieces in many journals. That can be a distraction because they think, oh, so how is he really going to write, erotic romance or whatever? So if it's relevant to the subject that you're writing on, if it's relevant to the, especially if you're writing fiction and your book is set in the field that you have had a long career in, I think that you can stick that in there. But I do think that primarily you're going to focus on the book you're writing, the comparisons to that book, the sort of authors, the tone, what that book is, the novel, if it's fiction. I'm making the assumption this is fiction. And then you're going to let the manuscript speak for itself. Should a new author mention membership and training with WLT? I would say that I skipped ahead, sorry guys. I would say that absolutely. I think that any organization you're involved in that has to do with showing that you have an interest in building community and being a part of the writing world is great. So whether it's the Writers League or if you're in kids books and you're a part of the Society for Children's Books, Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI, if you're a member of Sisters in Crime, any number of science fiction and fantasy organizations, Romance Writers of America. I think any of those things are absolutely worth mentioning in your bio because it shows that you're taking this seriously and that you're making connections and that you're interested in getting to know other writers and that it's something you really care about. If you've taken writing workshops, it really, quite honestly, it depends on the writing workshops. Like there are certain workshops that agents will absolutely care about. If you've been to Bread Loaf, certain places that you can go that will catch their eye. But for the most part, specifically naming a specific writing workshop is probably not going to necessarily push you in either direction, meaning it's not going to guarantee that they're going to read the manuscript. I think beyond that, the best thing you can do if you're writing fiction and nonfiction is to work on getting some getting some pieces placed. So if you're writing fiction, have you written short stories? Can you reach out to some journals? Or if you're writing novels, it's kind of hard to be someone who's committed to writing novels and just whip off a couple short stories so that you can get them published in a journal. But is there a piece of the novel that might work as a short piece? Or that's when I think entering contests and doing any sort of, place where you might be able to say, I was the finalist or the winner of X contest can be a really great thing too. For nonfiction, getting shorter pieces published or getting them in some online journals could be a good thing. Writing certificate programs, yeah, absolutely. Anything that's in that sort of MFA or certification side of writing, yeah, I think I would mention that for sure. And then mentioning a life blog, if you're trying to sell a novel, I think actually I wouldn't. I don't think you need to. If you have something that you've done like a blog or social media following that's really significant, number-wise, viewer-wise, then that could be something to mention. But if it's something that maybe doesn't have, a ton of viewers and also isn't directly connected to what you're writing, what you're pitching, then I wouldn't worry about it. And also keep in mind that there are two different conversations ideally you're going to have. You're going to have the conversation that's really the query letter when you make a pitch for yourself and for the project, right? But that pitch is really to get them to read it. And then the second conversation comes when an agent has read it and they say, I'd love to talk to you about representation. And that's when a lot of these other things can come in. That's when you can say, I've spent the last 5 summers at a writing workshop and I've just had this amazing experience that I've done all of this, critique work on not only this material, but other material. I have a blog that I'm really proud of. And if you wanted to read a little bit of it, you'd get an even better sense of who I am. Like those are for the bigger conversation. The short conversation is the query letter. And that's the one where you want to just mention the stuff that is going to be a positive for you and that's going to catch their eye and that's going to make them want to read something. I have a certificate in digital journalism, which not at all related to my novel. Is that worth mentioning? Look, do you have the real estate? Because that's the other thing I would talk about in a query letter that I often refer to as the real estate. Do you have the space in that letter for it to be one page and is mentioning your digital journalism, taking away from something else that might be more important that you should have in that letter? If it's not, and if you just want to give a little bit more to that bio, then absolutely mention it, because it's not a negative at all. You've got a certificate in journalism, it's a pretty good thing. And it shows that you're serious about your writing, and it shows that you have probably done, you're experienced in doing research and interviewing and all sorts of other skills that are great to have. If you won a contest under one title, but since then changed the title of your novel, do you need to include the original title of the book? Do agents search for a record of your win placement in contest? Yeah, I would say this material, a portion of this material won X contest under the title, and then in parentheses under the title, a big sky, so that they know that it was under a different title. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And no, do I think they're going to actually search for it? No, but I think that it just shows that it almost just gives an example of your own sort of straightforwardness and honesty in the letter that they would probably appreciate. So I think I would include it. I would just put it in parentheses. Okay. What are the top 3 to 5 things that grab your attention and make you want to read more? So it's hard because everybody's different. And for those of you who have been sending query letters out, I'm sure you have noticed that you can get a really positive reaction from one person and get, silence or maybe even a negative reaction from another, because it's also subjective. But for me, what grabs my attention is somebody who has a clean letter, who's not giving me, and I think there's another question that's going to ask what turns me off. So I'll just focus on what I like. Really just, when I say clean, I mean a letter that looks like it is taking up just the right amount of space. A compelled paragraph that focuses, for me, and I think for many agents, character is what we connect to. Character is your best way of having any sort of emotional connection, right? In such a small piece of space. So small bit of space. So somebody who jumps right in and gives me something interesting about a character that piques my curiosity, that's what grabs my attention. So I don't need a lot of backstory. I need to just feel like you've kind of dropped me in that compelled paragraph exactly, you know, where the action starts so that I want to read more. Yeah, I'd say those are, I mean, that's not 3 to 5 things, but that's what I usually, does it look like a letter that was written, you know, thoughtfully and with, you know, sparsely for lack of a better word? And what is the character, who is the character if it's fiction? If it's nonfiction, what I'm going to immediately do is go to the credentials. The minute you introduce the topic to me, I'm going to go see who you are. So I'll drop down and read your bio, and then I'll go back up and read the rest of the letter. If you say something like, I've written literary fiction, I can tell you that the first thing I'll do then is go to your bio and see if you have an MFA, if you have certain sort of touch points that are expected for literary fiction. I'm not saying that the only people who can write literary fiction have MFAs, because that's absolutely not true. But it's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go, you're setting up an expectation for me, so I'm going to go look at your bio, which is the big reason why I often tell people not to say that they're writing literary fiction in query letters, because I think sometimes we say literary fiction because we believe that it's sort of giving, it's explaining the quality of the writing, but actually for literary fiction, two things. Number one, keep in mind that commercial fiction sells a lot of copies, tends to. Literary fiction doesn't sell as many copies. So it's not quite the, you know, everybody's not expecting to or looking to buy or represent literary fiction all the time. But also, I think that, you know, when I think of literary fiction, it's usually going to be a more internal novel. It's going to be very character focused, not really about so much the plot and the pacing. And it means something completely different to me than this is really good writing. I think that you can have a really great writing in commercial fiction. So if you're calling it literary fiction because you want to make sure they know it's really well written, that's not a reason to call it literary fiction. Hope that makes sense. If my credentials as a nonfiction writer is 10 years writing geometry books, does that add value to me? It would depend. You know, I think that your credentials as a nonfiction writer are more about your credentials as they relate to the topic that you're writing about. So if you are writing a book that's in the world of math, then absolutely, I think the geometry comes into it. But the credentials aren't so much about your own experience as a writer, which can be helpful, but it's more about what is it about that topic that you are the right person to be writing about that topic. Okay. What are the top 3 to 5 things that make you stop reading or off-putting? I think trying to have too big of a voice in the query letter. The query letter is a professional tool for you to get to draw the interest of an agent. So when you give too much of a personality to it, sometimes it doesn't translate as well on the page as it might in person. So a lot of over-the-top humor, a lot of, you know, dear agent, are you sitting down because you're about to read the book of your career, that kind of thing. Don't do that. That's off-putting. Over-the-top comparisons that are just so sort of far-fetched. This is Harry Potter meets, I'm not going to say that. This is Harry Potter meets, you know, Harry Bosch or something, like things that just feel a little too big. This book is going to sell as many copies as, you know, Stephen King's best book. It's just, you set the bar so high that all you can do is come down from there. So I would say definitely not overselling. I'm not a fan of questions in query letters. I'm not a fan of, you know, imagine a world where. I'm not a fan of themes, like getting too into the theme of the book, because I think that that can be distracting. What I'd rather you do is tell me about the character and connect me to a character or connect me to a moment in time. So I would stay away, I would stay away from some of that stuff. That's my opinion. I am afraid agents might shy away from a book predicated on familicide. What do you think? I like this question because I think that absolutely there are topics that can be really tough, dark or taboo or any number of words that we're writing about. And it's a question of how you talk about it, especially in a query letter, before someone has even had the chance to read the manuscript. How do you talk about it in a way that's not going to turn someone off? So I would say that I think you don't lead with the darkest piece of it. I think you lead with sort of the character probably that's at the heart of it. I think you tell enough without telling everything in the query letter, because your hope would be that you get them to read and you get them to jump in, and maybe something that they would have thought at the outset might be too tough for them. Actually, once they start reading the writing and the voice and they respond to it, it's, you know, it's too late. They're there. So I think not misleading in a query letter, but just not being too like in their face about the darker parts of it is the way to go, would be my suggestion. If there's humor in the book, would it help to have a bit of humor in the query letter? Yeah, I think that if it's a humorous book, you could have, I think the humor would be in the compel though. I think the humor wouldn't be from the get-go. It wouldn't be in the opening connection. It wouldn't be in the context, except you might offer an example of a comparison of a humorous voice that would probably tell them pretty quickly. If you're saying, you know, this is Harry Potter, which you're not going to say, meets David Sedaris, then you hear the words David Sedaris, you know that it's humorous, right? So the humor could be in the compel, like if the actual funny haha, I would put that in the compel, because that's where you're kind of giving the setting the scene, setting the atmosphere, giving a little bit of what the story is. But I don't think you want to be too over the top funny anywhere else in that letter. If you find 6 agents that meet your criteria, do you send 6 query letters, or do you send one at a time until you hear a reply and then move on to the next? It's a great question. You send your query letters all at the same time, unless, well, the first thing you do, actually, you pull your list together. And, you know, I would say you're probably going to find hopefully more than 6 agents that might be the right fit. But you pull your list together, and then you're going to go one by one through them and look at their submission guidelines. And you're going to understand exactly how they want that material submitted, queried, because some of those agents, 1 or 2 of them, may say that they only read exclusive submissions. And if they say that they only read exclusive submissions, that means they would not read something that you had sent out to multiple people. So it's good to know up front who those people are and what they expect. And we have a question coming up a little later that touches on that, so I'll circle back to it. Would it be ideal to write a different query letter, or can you use the same letter but with obvious changes to name, address, and preferences? Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably going to use the same letter except for that connection, that first C. You're going to really target it in that line or 2 lines to that particular agent. Okay, topic 4, category and genre. Some people had questions that sort of touched on these. After 4 years of research and writing, I'm bringing closure to a nonfiction manuscript, and I'm anxious to learn more about the query letter. I'm stumped on choosing a category. The story is the biography of a well-educated man and his mother who ends his own life after committing fraud and killing his wife and children. Is it true crime, murder, biography, something else? Is getting the correct category important? Yes, getting the correct category is important insofar as it's what's going to help you identify agents who might be interested in the book, understanding what the category is. But you also may submit to agents, and one or two of them may say to you, I actually think this is not true crime as much as it's just really interesting narrative nonfiction. So you can be open to it being a different category than the category that you initially present it as, but I do believe that going into it, you need to have an idea for yourself of what the category is, and then be open-minded. So when I look at this, I think, I think true crime, honestly, but what is the best, I'd throw it back at you and say, what is the best comparison title to this book? Is there something, out there that you think this is the book that you're modeling this after? And what category is that book in? Because that might be a great way for you to figure it out, because any comparison titles you're going to offer are going to be books that sit on the bookstore shelf next to this book. I hope that helps. Okay. Which genres might benefit most from a proposal when querying a novel? I wasn't quite sure exactly what this question was asking, but I am gonna guess. So when you query a novel, you are not using a proposal. You're using the full manuscript. You're going to have the full manuscript ready. So when you say proposal to me, I assume you're talking about maybe an outline of what the book is going to be, chapter by chapter breakdown, and then some sample chapters, which is absolutely expected in nonfiction, but in fiction, you're expected to have the full manuscript. But I believe that there are some genres that agents are fine or would expect that they might receive proposals instead of the full manuscript. I think in the kidlit world, this is true of young adult and middle grade. I don't know if it's true across the board, but I think there are definitely some agents who are taking on projects based on a proposal, not a final manuscript. I wasn't also sure if maybe there was this word proposal was meant to be synopsis, in which case I think that there absolutely, or I know that there are genres where they would expect you to have a synopsis because it's very helpful for them to see if you're sort of following the beats or the expectations of that genre in the story. So again, I would point you back to the submission guidelines, because everything you need to know in terms of what you're expected to have is going to be there for each of the agents that you're going to be interested in querying. Queries as a part of the novel, plan for marketing and more. Okay, so it's not expected that you have a marketing plan in place or that you offer a marketing plan when you're querying a novel. I would say if there is a very particular one or two or more things that you bring to the table that are unique and really possibly could impact or the decision of an agent to represent you, then I would include that in the query letter. So if you, for instance, just happen to be a part of an organization that has a 100,000 person outreach, and you'd be able to connect with all of those people when your book is published, or any number of things that might show that you have a real specific marketing in, that should be in the query letter. I wouldn't build a proposal around it. I would just do a traditional query. A more extensive section of comps in this kind of query, parts of the proposal that don't appear in a query. Query has to be tight, proposals can run longer. Yeah, but again, I'll just say that for fiction, it's not expected that you would include a proposal, and I would not expect that an agent would read a proposal, because for fiction, what they care about is primarily what they're going to be concerned about is the voice and the writing, the writing itself. So again, you could absolutely include it. I would never want you to not include something that you really want to include because I said that you didn't need to. So if you feel very strongly that it should go with whatever you send, absolutely. But the most important thing to do is to look at the submission guidelines and make sure that you're giving them whatever they want. Okay. Some places I see indicate that high concept is important nowadays, but it seems to be extremely nebulous as to what that means. Hard to imagine a fiction work not relating to 2 or more other previously published categories. Explanation, please. Perhaps some examples. So, yeah, I know. High concept is such a strange thing to include in your query sort of wants, right? Because what does that mean? I mean, a high concept, of course, my assumption would be that what they're asking for is something that has a very, has a big hook to it, has a really, you know, sort of larger than life, unique, interesting story. And it's what everybody wants. But, you know, I don't think it means that people aren't taking on projects that aren't high concept. I just think it means that it's a part of everybody's wish list. Hard to imagine a fiction work not relating to 2 or more other previously published categories. I don't think that high concept means it's not definable. It's not a category. I think you can have high concept thrillers, you can have high concept science fiction, fantasy, any number of things. So I wouldn't say that it means you can't say that your book is what it is, whatever genre it fits into. I think it just means that they're looking for something that sounds very, So if it is high concept, sorry, I got distracted. Do you recommend saying so in your query? I think high concept is something almost like literary fiction. Why do you have to say it? Why don't you show me? So when you start to describe that story, whatever it is you have, it should be clear to me that it's high concept. It should be, the hook should be in that description. So I don't think you need to say that it is. And I think sometimes when you say something like that, it sort of makes them scrutinize it a little bit more, right? I'll let you know if I think this is high concept or not. So instead, just let the idea, the cool hook speak for itself. In what case would you send a synopsis? I mean, honestly, you would send it when they want it. So unfortunately for novelists, occasionally some agents will want it, some agents won't. So you kind of have to write it regardless, if you have even just one agent that wants you to have a synopsis. Yeah, I mean, out of the ordinary different. High concept just means out of the ordinary different. I think yeah, I mean, I'm not articulating it well at all, but I imagine we can all think of sort of movies we've seen or books that we've read that had a particular, you know, cool twist to them. I think the Da Vinci Code, if I'm dating myself, for years ago when I worked in publishing, was probably one of the first like high concept, big thrillers that really attracted a huge, large audience. Hunger Games, yeah. I mean, that's a great concept. That's a great example. So if anyone else has high concept examples they want to throw into the chat for this question, I'd love it. Maybe not. Yes. Okay. Topic 5. Some people had questions about conferences. So regarding pitching agents at conferences or workshops, what does it mean if they request a first look? Okay, so this goes back to the idea of exclusivity. Some agents will require that they're the only one reading a manuscript. They won't want you to have simultaneous query letters out. So what I say to writers in this situation is if you make a list of agents that you're going to approach, you're probably going to have a few names on there who are really your dream agents, right? The people who, if they offered you representation, you would probably say yes if you had a good conversation with them because of who they are, because of who they represent, because of whatever you've read about them. Those are the people you might offer an exclusivity to. You might say, yes, you can be the only person reading this manuscript because they truly are the person that you want to work with. If it's somebody that you're not really sure about, and you have a lot of other people on your list and none of those other people are requesting exclusivity, I think that, you know, I'm not a fan of agents requiring exclusivity. I never did it myself. And I do think that it puts the writer at a disadvantage, because it means that you have to wait until that person finishes reading before you can send it out to anyone else. So you're sitting there waiting and waiting. So in that case, if it is somebody that you're interested in working with, if it's worth it to you to wait a little while, what I would suggest is giving them a deadline, a very specific deadline. So saying to them, you know, I'd be thrilled to work with you. I'd love to let you read this exclusively, but I need to hear back from you in 30 days, and just get them to agree to some sort of deadline so that it's not something that potentially is going to drag out for a while. I would agree with, you know, one comment says I wouldn't submit to those agents personally. Again, I think it's just, is that agent one of the agents that is really, you know, your dream agent? And if it is, it's worth giving them exclusivity, I think, but giving them exclusivity with a deadline. Okay, what if you talk to an agent at a WLT conference and he or she invited you to submit some material, but then life happened and a career change in your day job happened and the first draft of another book happened, and now it's been 5 or 6 years since that conference? Can you still mention that invitation if you submit something for that original book to that agent now or even in the future? Or does the invitation eventually expire? You'd be better off submitting to that agent without even mentioning that invitation, since you took so long to get around to it. Honestly, I think an invitation is an invitation. You know, things could have changed for that agent. First of all, they may not even be at the agency that they were at, or they may not even be an agent anymore. But if they are still an agent, and you can find them wherever they might be, there's a chance that they're no longer really focused on whatever category or genre or topic you're writing about, but there's a chance that they are. So I would say an invitation is an invitation, and you put in the subject line, requested material in all caps. We met at the blank conference. And then in the body of the query letter, your connection is, I met you, it was a few years ago, and I've just, you know, I didn't want to submit this material until it was really ready. I didn't want to waste your time, but here it is, and I'd love to have you consider it. And then you get what you get. But I think, you know, stuff happens. Time passes. It's not always 5 to 6 years, but time passes. So go ahead and do it, and definitely mention that you met them. Okay. Topic 6, finding the right fit. Who isn't excited about that? Okay, do agents really read the query letters, or do they have staff read them first and decide whether or not to pass them to the agent? Everybody's different. I read every query letter that I received because they came to my personal or my work email. So they didn't go to an assistant. So I read them all and I responded directly if it was something that I wanted to read some pages of. And then, yeah, if I got some pages in, I may read it. I may have my assistant read it, but you know, the reason that agents have assistants is because they want to have someone in their immediate vicinity who understands what their tastes are, who is a good reader, who's a thoughtful reader, and who can identify what might be a project that would be of interest to them. So there is no negative to an agent having an assistant or an associate who's reading for them and who's helping them be, you know, selective about what they're going to spend their time on. I think it's a real positive, especially if you have that second person who maybe reads a query letter and the agent says, I don't think this is for me, but if you want to pursue it, you can. And now suddenly you have someone else who is really excited about building their list, who's read a query letter that they're excited about, and maybe they get back to you. So yes, some agents do read the query letters directly. Some have their staff read them, but either way, it's not a bad thing. Okay. I feel like finding the right agent is like finding the right partner. Even if you do all the right professional expectations an agent asks for, they may or may not pick your work. Is this accurate? Is this how I should approach my querying? Do as asked and stay honest to the work, and eventually I'll find my fit. Yes, this is totally true. It's not personal, it's taste, it's, you know, reading something at the right moment and having a connection to it or not having a connection. And so yeah, it takes time, and I would say it takes a lot of querying, and I'd say that there are a lot of agents in the world, and if you've only queried 10 agents, you've only queried 10 agents, and the right one, you deserve the right fit. I mean, this is true. Every writer should have an agent who talks about their work with passion and excitement, who is thinking about their career, who wants to be in this with them. And it's worth waiting for that person and not just ending up with somebody who is not the right fit. So absolutely, absolutely. I think if you stick it out and you keep it up and you do your research, and you hone the craft and you get the material in the best shape possible, then it's worth finding the right fit and doing the work you very well may. So what if agent invited to submit, but you have a different finished project since then that you feel is a better submission? Yeah, I mean, I think you can still do the same thing. Connect with them, let them know when they asked for the material, where, if it's at a conference, but then say, I talked to you at that time about my, X novel, but what I'm querying you about today is this novel, or that nonfiction project previously, but what I'm querying you about today is this nonfiction project. I think you want to be upfront about the fact that you're not querying them now with the thing that you talked to them about, but it's still a connection. It's still a way in. If you met them in person, that's always a great connection, regardless of what the material or the project might be this time around. All right. How many authors does a typical literary agent effectively manage or represent? I mean, there's so many answers to this, a lot. But keep in mind that they're all in different stages at any one moment. So you might represent an author, you might have 5 clients who actually aren't actively working on anything. Maybe they published books in the last 10 years and you're still, there for phone calls and to respond to things, but there's nothing active. You then have clients who are on their 2nd or 3rd book, and you're managing those contracts, you're making sure that they get their new deals. But it's kind of the same thing each time, right? So you're used to, what the work is, how to manage those responsibilities. And then you have people who are publishing for the first time, debuts, and that's like a bigger piece of your day because your focus, because you're helping them understand the industry and kind of taking them through a process for the first time. So it's always going to take up a little bit more time. And then you have this bit of time reserved for courting and talking to and working with either prospective clients or new clients who haven't yet gotten to the point where you're ready to submit. So in any one of those categories, you could have, many multiples of people, but they're all at sort of different stages of the process. So the answer is there's no actual typical number, I guess. I have a few partials out and one full on my last book. There are agents I'd like to query with my most recent project. How do I approach this? I mean, I'd be interested to know a little bit more about the timing. Is it something that they've been reading for 2 months, 6 months, 8 months, or that they've had for that long? Are you moving on to the next project because you're just deciding that that project is no longer viable? Are you still interested in publishing that previous, the earlier project that they're still looking at? These are all the questions that I would have, but I would say that probably I mean, have you taken that first project as far down the road as you really could at this point before now starting to query something else? I think it's a little, you know, murky if you're starting to submit or query multiple projects to one agent who has another project of yours that they're already considering, and now you're sending another one to them. So I guess my best piece of advice would be, why not just see that first book as far as you can see it before starting to query on a second book, especially if it's been about 6 months, because unfortunately 6 months is actually a very, it's not a long amount of time. I stay away from agents who have a ton of authors listed on their website, yet none whose books I am familiar with. Is that a good tactic? I mean, if you're, I think that probably if there's not even a single author that you're familiar with, it's not a bad thing that, you know, to sort of be, to wonder who it is these authors are publishing. But more interesting than the names of the authors, actually, I would say, would be who are the publishers? Who are they actually selling books to? If they have a ton of authors on their website, you don't recognize who the authors are, but you recognize things like St. Martin's Press, Berkeley, Plume, Dutton. That would be more interesting to me, because there are so many books and so many authors in the world that, you know, I'm sure I look at agent websites and don't recognize a single author, but they're reputable and successful. What's the best way to create your list? Do research on agents. I've been told Guide to Literary Agents, agency websites, Publishers Weekly, Query Tracker. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I suggest to everybody when they're starting to make that list is to go to the bookstore shelf that your book belongs on, find other books that would sit next to your book, and see who those agents are. So look at the acknowledgements. Everybody, you know, most writers are going to thank their agents in their acknowledgements. So start with that. Create a list based on agents who are obviously already representing books in that category. But then, yeah, there are a lot of online tools. Poets and Writers is one database that one of the agents recommended at the front of this presentation. Query Tracker, I know, has a database. Looking at agency websites for sure. Publishers Weekly. I don't know, Publishers Weekly does their deals section at the beginning of the magazine every week. So they do mention agents who've bought or who have sold books recently in certain categories. It's not a bad place to look. I think Publishers or Poets and Writers, the magazine, is also a great magazine for writers just in general. But again, their agent database is great as well. Okay. Ooh, okay. So then there were many questions that didn't really fit in any of those other categories. Okay. Should you put links into an email query to a sample chapter or other information? I would say no, that I would never click on a link in an email query that someone sent me. Oftentimes it'll be, you can check out my website, click here, or if you'd like to know more about me, you can find my author bio, click here. No, the information that I need to know in order to say whether or not I'm going to support your or read your material should be in that query letter, and I shouldn't have to go search for it, and I shouldn't have to click on links, and especially like these days when we're also wary of links. So I would stay away from them. What should your synopsis look like? For example, the back cover of the book. So for a synopsis, this is how I define a synopsis. I think that a synopsis is usually 1 page, but it can certainly be a couple pages. I've seen synopses that were more than 1 page, and sometimes they just have to be. They are single spaced. They are not, they're a clear roadmap to the story, to the book. So you're gonna, if you read a synopsis, you should have an idea where the book starts, where it goes, who the major characters are, what the major conflict is, and how it's resolved at the end. So synopses don't end with a question, they don't end with a cliffhanger. They are a roadmap to the book that will tell me exactly what the major sort of beats to that story are. So in that way, they actually aren't, I think, akin to the back cover of the book, because often jacket copy is what I was talking about earlier, that compel paragraph that gets you to want to read more. You don't get the full story on jacket copy. You get enough that will tease you and compel you, but it doesn't tell you everything. A synopsis really is a roadmap to the book. Okay, what exactly is a synopsis supposed to do? An experienced editor recently told me that the only thing to put in a synopsis is the interaction between a protagonist and an antagonist. Do you agree? No, not really. I mean, I think that probably, yes, if your book has a really clear battle between two characters, that's going to be a big part of the synopsis, but the synopsis really should give me some of the setting. It should tell me how the book is going to progress. So if there's a major interaction between a protagonist and antagonist, where does that start? Where does it go? And where does it end? Are there other characters that are worth mentioning that are important characters, even if they're secondary characters? I think absolutely in a synopsis, you're going to have those characters mentioned. So I wouldn't say that you can state it so simply as just the interaction between a protagonist and an antagonist, in my opinion. But I'm not an experienced editor, so whoever you heard that from, I'm sure has their own good reason for giving you that advice. Which would be worse, a query letter that doesn't say the novel's word count, or a query letter that says a super long word count? Yeah, what I usually say to writers is, if the submission guidelines don't tell you that you need to include a word count, then I wouldn't include a word count, because a word count can sometimes be that distracting thing that, whether, it's so high or that maybe it feels a little low, that could immediately pull them out of the letter and sort of take their mind somewhere else, when what you want them to do is to keep reading and get to that compel part of the letter. So if they ask for a word count, though, you need to include it because they've specifically asked for it. And then I would just educate yourself on sort of what the accepted word counts are for your genre or category, and have an idea of whether or not the one that you're going to put in your letter is going to be shocking to them. Obviously, when you're dealing with fantasy, you're going to expect to have a longer word count. When you're dealing with epic historical fiction, a longer word count. There are some categories that you would not expect to have 200,000 words. Many categories, most categories, that you wouldn't expect that. So it might also be a moment for you to think about the length of your novel and whether or not there's some more editing or revising that you should do. See a question about word count over here. Should you include word count if it's exactly in the acceptable window? I mean, again, I think that I tend to say to writers that unless they're asking for the word count, I don't think you need to include the word count. But sure, if it's in the acceptable window, there's no reason that it's going to be a negative for you if you include it. I'm just a fan of, honestly, not including the word count unless you have to, but that's a little bit more epic historical fiction. Okay, so epic historical fiction, I would say, would be, sort of sprawling, starting here and taking us 100 years across a family's life, or a period of time in a country, or, just a big story that requires, or that has a lot of characters, multiple storylines, set in the past, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm sorry to take up so much time, guys. All right, I'm going to keep going. Should an online query be text only or have inserted images also? I would not suggest any inserted images in a query, an email query. How do I like this question? How do I write query letters for short story publication in magazines, etc.? Actually, I've heard that, this is not my specialty, but I've definitely heard that really it's not so much about the query letter when you're submitting to journals and magazines, that it can be pretty short and sweet. A lot of people actually submit through things like Submittable online submission platforms, and it's more about them just diving in and reading the material. So I wouldn't worry about having to. I think it's a different expectation in the journal magazine world than it is in the book world. Okay. Oh, so that was the last question. This is your reminder that we're doing this one next week. So I hope you guys will come out for it. So let me see if there's anything else in the chat box. Is it better to query a series or just the first book in the series with mention of other works? Wouldn't a series represent commitment versus a single or standalone novel? So I would say that you're going to query the first book. You're going to want it to be a satisfying read on its own. But in certain genres, they would expect that, or they would understand that you might be doing a series, you might have a trilogy. So I think, certainly in the mystery world, when you're establishing a character, it's expected, especially a procedural, that it's going to have another book and another book in the series. Science fiction and fantasy, same thing, right? So in certain categories, absolutely, I would focus on the first book, and then I would make it clear that you have other books planned. I've found online for commercial fiction, good range is 90 to 100, but 90,000 is sweet spot. True. Yeah, I would say anywhere, even 85 to 90,000. I think that's probably true, those numbers. Again, for page count, we're talking about for commercial fiction. Any strategies for coming up with a good comp title? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that if you're writing in a particular category or space, being a big reader in that category and space is important. And knowing who the writers are who have the sort of same tone of voice or who have a similar main character, maybe their protagonist has a similar humor to them or family life or something that connects them. I think just being a reader and identifying and at that point being able to identify other books that feel like are a good fit for what you're doing, if that helps. Sometimes you can do that by researching agents under the category that you're writing in, and then looking at their lists and maybe getting some book ideas that you might pick up and read to see if that might be a good comparison for you. It can be as easy as going to your local bookseller, when we're allowed to go to our local bookseller again, and asking them, hey, I'm writing this kind of book, and I'm wondering if you have any other books in this store that you would recommend that sound similar or might be a good comparison to this book. I think talking to booksellers is a great way to find comparison titles. Thanks. Writing a Western adventure. Am I swimming against the current? A Western adventure? No, I mean, it goes back to finding the right fit. There are agents who are just hungry to find voices that they enjoy and talking about characters and stories that are interesting. And I just think you have to keep at it. I mean, are you going to find fewer agents who specifically say they're looking for a Western adventure? Probably. But if you do your research and you find those people and you've written and you've worked on this book and it's something that they respond to, then I think you possibly could find the right fit. So I wouldn't think that you're swimming against the current at all. My anti-war story matches up with Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five and others in that vein. Is that comparison what you would call over the top? I don't think it's over the top. I think, though, that if you're going to compare to a classic, then you need to compare, maybe partner that classic with a more modern book, more contemporary book. So if you're going to talk about Slaughterhouse-Five, is there a book that's been published in the last 5 years that you can kind of set next to it? How important is it to find comps? I write YA fantasy and I've been reading exclusively in my genre for about 4 years. And I've read nothing that feels like my book. I don't think it's unique, but that maybe I'm just not finding anything that seems similar. I don't think, though, sometimes what you should remember when you talk about comparison titles is it doesn't have to be that they've written the same story that you're writing, or that the scene, the setting is the same, or the plot is the same, or anything like that. But is there something about the tone of a particular writer that is a good comparison for your tone and your voice? Is there something about the in that case, it could be a little bit about larger themes, right? You could, in the way that Jodi Picoult really examines the inner workings of families and complex relationships. That's what I'm doing in this book. So I think that's a time when you can talk about themes. So sometimes it's not just about this comparing a story, a book to a book. It can be also comparing your voice as a writer to someone else's voice, but give the evidence, like give the good case for it. Don't just say, I write like Jodi Picoult. Give your evidence for why you think the way that you're tackling a subject is similar to the way that maybe she has tackled a subject. Is it okay to leave out comps, or as an agent, did you like them? The thing I like about comps is that they go back to that second C of context. So if you can establish context very, pretty clearly without using a comp, I think that's fine. But sometimes you're writing a book or a story that is two different, maybe it bridges two different categories. Maybe it's, got an unexpected voice, but also a very specific plot. And the best way for you to really give me an idea, a flavor of what that is by giving me some comparisons. But if it's really plain and clear what you're writing is Western adventure, then that's probably all you have to say. You don't have to give me comparison titles necessarily. When I say give evidence, what I mean is, I don't think give evidence is probably the right way to say it, but what I mean is, if you're going to use somebody, especially a pretty successful writer as a comparison, or a successful book as a comparison, then back it up with like a good reason why you've done that. So it's not just, I've written a book that will be for fans of Jodi Picoult. It's, I've written a book that fans of Jodi Picoult will appreciate because of this reason, because I've done this thing that, she does, but I've done it in my own way in this story. That's what I mean. What if your comp is 15 plus years old, but is part of an ongoing series that is still published? Should we use the first book in the series or the most recent one? Again, I think that's a place where you might refer to the series itself, like just in general, the series, in the way that, what I'm doing here is akin to X series, and and then give the reasons, give the backup, give the support that claim. Did I miss any questions, guys? I don't think I did. I'll stick around if anyone has any additional questions, but I'll just mention again that next Thursday, where you get to hang out with me again if you want to, and Stacy Swan, who is a real delight. And we will be talking about editing and revising. I'm excited to talk to her about that. You can find the link on our website. And Erica, by the way, I know I owe you an email, so I'll be sending that to you soon. But you can find the link for the for next week's on our website, on our calendar on April 9th. And we'll also send a follow-up email to everybody who registered for this and include information about that one too. Okay, so thanks guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me talk at you for an hour, and just stay in touch. We're here for you and just want to do anything we can to make your life a little more enjoyable right now. So take care. You're welcome.